Thought I had that up already. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Attica's Women on Watch.
See it. All right.
We are live, and we are going to get started with our second episode of Women on Watch, which is a bill club. And we are going to be talking about some important bills that are on the agenda. And we have a 20-second delay, so we kind of have a little hiccup when we're getting started, still, since this is still new to us. But so please bear with us. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and reminders. Tonight's video will be shared publicly, so comments may be seen by people outside this group. We are making this up as we go, so please be patient and send your suggestions, and we welcome volunteers as well. We have a couple of great guest speakers joining us this evening. They are asked to keep their comments brief so we have enough time for every category speaker and Q&A at the end. Speakers are asked to discuss bills that recently had movement or are expected to move this week. Future bills can be discussed in subsequent weeks because this is a weekly program. So keep coming back each Monday at 6 p.m. and help us find experts for each program, issue, or bill. Women are preferred, but if you know of something that you want to hear about and you know somebody that would make a great subject matter expert, send them our way and we will include them in a future broadcast. This Zoom conference software will cost $160 for the next 3 months during the next, while the legislative session is going on. We paid for that out of our Save Our Schools budget. So if you would like to help us offset those costs, please donate. There is a link, the paypal.me/SOSKY. Or you can use friends and family and send it to our email address, which is moderator@saveourschoolsky.org. Moving on to the next screen, as I mentioned, there is a delay, so I have to make sure everything is responding. Here is the format. It's a 1-hour conversation with 30 minutes of Q&A at the end. I will have to jump back and forth from my screen every once in a while, so I apologize if the slides leave us, but I am traveling this week. Unfortunately, we had a death in our family, and I'm in Texas, so I am on my laptop, and I'm trying to toggle back and forth. We are expecting one of our guests to still join us, so I have to go into the moderator panel every once in a while and see if he's in the waiting room, in the green room, if you will. So just give you a heads up that that may be happening, and you don't need to adjust the set. It's all part of the technology that we are dealing with today. But the schedule is 1 hour of conversation. We've done the housekeeping and intro, so I think we're still a little bit on schedule, which is good. We're going to talk about Attica's latest bills. We've got Naomi Penner with us today. She writes the Bill Watch list, that is the famous Bill Watch list that you've probably seen on Together We Will's Facebook page and web page. We're also going to talk about new bills and bills on the move. I apologize that there's a lot on those slides and the font is really small, but we're gonna push through it. Naomi's going to talk about that as well. And then I'm going to do a little bit more talking about some of the bills on education because those are hot right now. Then we've got Lisa Wilner in the room. Say hey, Lisa.
Hey, everybody.
Lisa is going to talk about district level issues regarding what some of the things Governor Bevin mentioned during his budget speech last week. And then Jim will be joining us to talk about his tax restructuring plan. So I'm not going to take away any of his thunder. I'm going to let him do all the talking on that. And then we've got some resources and action items at the end. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A right around the 7 o'clock mark. And even though you're part of the discussion that's happening live right now, we will be sharing this out on YouTube and repeating it again every week as we go. I think we had 200 or so views last week when we were live, and then I haven't had a chance to check to see what the replay looks like yet, but I know that it was well watched and well received. So thank you guys for joining us and for being part of this conversation. We really want to be able to get women engaged and women talking about what kind of legislation is coming down the pipeline that could affect us, our families, our kids, our schools, our communities. And too often, men are the ones that have been the legislators that have been making all the decisions and having these conversations, and our voices have been left out. So this group was brought together by Attica, an idea that Attica had, that women really need to have their own space to have these conversations without being trampled on, if that's a word. Trampled on. I think I made up a new word. So that's the purpose of this group. Hopefully no one is offended by the fact that they aren't able, if they're male and they're not able to join us. their voices have been loud and strong for a long time, so hopefully they'll respect us needing a safe space to get together and have dialogue. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Just to remind you, we're going to be talking about some links, and you're going to be thinking, oh my gosh, this is going by too fast. Just rest assured that the links that we're talking about will be shared in the comments at the end of the program, so you can grab them and get to these places quickly. There are lots of places you can go to see what different groups' opinions are on these bills. Naomi's going to do a quick tour of the LRC website for us, just to get you a little bit familiar with some of the things that are available there. We've got KFTC, we've got Kentucky Ed Policy. In fact, I'd love to have Jason Bailey on as a guest in a week or two, see if he's available to tell us about some of the things that actually have been researched and scored, if you will, to see the effects of some of the costs of some of these proposals that our governor has addressed or not addressed in some cases. There's a link to find your legislator. Everyone needs to know who their legislators are. This is very, very important. If you don't already know, there is a link here to find your legislator. You have a House rep and a senator. So each of you has two people that you can go to talk to about the issues and how you want them to vote. They are responsive to us. They need to hear from us. They often are. They have so many items on their plate that they can't possibly be well versed and have understanding of the real world impacts. So find out who your legislators are, and then make sure they hear from you so that you can be represented in their votes. So I'm going to turn it over to Naomi. She's going to run through some of Attica's new bills just this week. She's been a busy lady.
Okay, maybe should I start with the website first, or I'll do the bills?
Whatever you like.
Okay, I'll just go briefly through the website and okay. This is new for me too. Let's see.
Do I need to relinquish, or can you take it over?
Can you see my screen?
Got it. Yes.
Okay, so this is the LRC website. It's very lovely and kind of outdated color-wise. It's lrc.ky.gov. Over here is legislator information, and here's that lovely, who's my legislator? If the internet is going to be kind of slow. Well, this is good. Okay, so here it is. You type in your address, and it's really easy. It'll give you your House rep and your Senate rep. They're in two different districts. Don't ask me how that is districted. Okay, so if you want to find activity for this period, you go under Legislative Activity, 2018 record, and I can go, here's the internet again. I can go more in depth at another time, just for the sake of time now, but you have in Senate, in House, pass, committee meeting, bills in committee, bills, resolutions, etc. We are up to 224 House bills and 95 Senate bills. It'll keep growing until sometime in February. So you can just, play around. It's not a very easy site. It's a little bit cumbersome. But let's say you want to see a House bill 162. It'll explain a little bit, tell you where it is down here, who is the sponsor. And then another note on this site for this session is the calendar. Okay, so legislative calendar and schedules. Here you can find out when the committees meet. Here's just an overall, what days we're in session, when we're not. And this will tell you day by day what's in. So tomorrow, education has a lot of bills posted in committee to vote on, and we'll decide if that gets through to the next step in the process. And it just tells you, they're pretty good at keeping things on record. Okay, so that's that. And now to the bills. I think, Gay, I'll need your screen again.
All right. Thank you.
And please, if you have any questions, I will help you with them. Okay.
I guess I ended my slideshow when I did that. I don't know. Let me go to where we were. We had Attica's bills and go.
Okay, so Attica listed, posted some really great bills last week, but she added some new ones this week. The first one, and I wish you were here to give them justice because they're not my bills, but I'll do my best. House Bill 188 would provide a free security freeze in the event that a person has been notified of the security breach. And the first person listed, the first legislator, is always the person who I think has written the bill initially, but she has Mary Lou Marzian and Mr. Reginald Meeks with her on that bill, and it's currently in House Banking and the House Banking and Insurance Committee. So please support that. House Bill 189 would permit consolidated local governments to enact local legislation related to certain issues on firearms and ammunition governance. I kind of have an idea what that can mean. I wish she could explain that more, but I'm sure if you ask her about it, she can tell you more about that. And it is in the House Local Government Committee. Then we have House Bill 196. This one is Mary Lou Marzian's bill, but Attica has signed on to sponsor it. And it would require electric suppliers to use increasing amounts of renewable energy, implement energy efficiency programs, and require the Public Service Commission to develop tariff guidelines for purchase of renewable power. And that's the first environmentally conscious bill that I have seen. Sometimes I miss a lot of bills, so if you find more, please let me know. And House Bill 209, which I think is a beautiful bill, and I hope it goes far, but we'll see. It would prohibit people convicted of a hate crime from possessing firearms, which to me makes sense as a piece of legislation, especially all that's happened in the news under this presidency. And that is in the House Judiciary Committee. And those are Attica's bills that she's, okay. So these are the bills on the move. We have House Bill 124, which is basically addressing the opioid epidemic. Sorry, I have trouble speaking sometime. These bills are written in a way that's not very easy to understand. And sometimes I pull from other sources to help me explain them. And this one, I don't know all the details, and if someone wants to chime in about it that might be able to understand it a little more, please feel free. But just looks like it would review the current state licensure and quality standards for substance use disorder treatment and recovery services. And I guess kind of checking things out and not making sure things aren't getting out of hand. And that's sponsored by Representative Attica Wuchner. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. So that's gone to a second reading in the House Health and Family Services Committee. And then it goes to rules. And I think usually they get a third reading, but that might mean that it's on its way to a vote in the House. And then if it passes the House, it'll go into a Senate committee and then repeat that and maybe eventually land on the governor's desk. Okay, so House Bill 76 would be a constitutional amendment, meaning that we, if it passes, would be able to vote on it. I'm not sure which year during a regular election cycle. So I'm not sure if that would be this year or not. If anyone has anything to say about that.
Lisa may know, and in fact, I'm going to ask if you guys let me pause my screen for a second. I'm going to jump over and just see if anybody's in the waiting room. If you want to talk about that, maybe Lisa could even answer some of that. I'm not sure if she's aware. I'm going to put her on the spot, though. While I check my green room over here.
Oh, no. Wait. Okay. I guess, Lisa, you don't have anything to say about that?
I don't at this time.
Okay, that's okay. So I want to go back. House Bill 124, if you were calling the message line, I would support that bill unless I hear anything else that maybe the language of the bill has some loopholes. House Bill 76, we're opposing it because it's calling for a convention to revise or amend the Constitution. And this is different because I don't know what they want to do with the Constitution. Sometimes they'll say for financial reasons, but this could mean it would open it up. And I know there's a process. I don't know the depths of the process, but it's just kind of dangerous. I don't think any of us right now want to open up the Constitution. No, not at all. That one was posted in committee. Oh,
Sorry.
That's okay. And the House Elections, Constitutional Amendments, and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, which I think met today, but I guess it is not getting read maybe next week. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. You can go to the next.
I have
Okay.
2 more slides for you, so maybe just hit the high notes on the ones that you think are the most egregious.
Okay. So HB 169, Gang Violence Reduction Bill. We saw this last year. It sounds great, but it would lead to more racial profiling and mass incarceration. It might not go anywhere this year, but keep your eye on that one because that's just a dangerous bill. HB 181, if you remember last year, the Blue Lives Matter bill passed, but this, which was a bill that kind of was going against the Black Lives Matter movement as a way to protect police officers, but they're Attica's trying to repeal that, and Representative Meeks and Representative Marzian and a bunch of others. HB 197 would require maternity leave for companies that have a lot of employees, which is great. Support that. Let's see. Oh, Senate Bill 80 is another bill to try to push medical marijuana, getting that legalized, and how to just deal with that.
They're calling that the responsible use bill, I believe.
Oh, okay. The responsible use bill. I'd have to find out more about that. And it's sponsored by a Republican senator, so that means it has more of a chance of getting further into the process. Let's see. We have, again, HB 210 is a bill we saw last year, which would allow people with permits of carry concealed weapons to carry those on universities or in government buildings. Excuse me. And that was hopefully won't go through or go farther. Yeah. Okay. I think that's good on that slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to move forward, but I think I hit the wrong button, so I have to pause. Okay, there it goes.
Okay, excuse me. Let's see. House Bill 182, we support it. It would mandate earned paid sick leave. House Bill 195, we would support it because it prohibits discrimination because of sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, so House Bill 215, when you're calling, oppose it strongly because it would require a voter to have government or university issued ID during elections. And I mean, I know we've heard in the news about voter ID laws, and that just makes it harder for people to vote. House Joint Resolution 81. This is calling to, it's sending, I think these send a message to Congress saying they want to add Kentucky to the states that want to open up the U.S. Constitution to be revised. And in order to have a constitutional convention, you need 34 states. And I believe Kentucky would make it 29 or 30. So we're getting dangerously close. So please oppose that one every day. Yeah, that's dangerous.
Yes, that's a Koch initiative there.
Yes, indeed. A lot of these bad bills are actually. So Stephanie, I know you're moderating the comments. Do we have any questions that people have been asking along the way so far?
We've had a couple of people that's having difficulties to get on.
Oh,
let's see.
Saw that, but I see they're getting on eventually, so I don't think it's anything that we're doing.
Okay. Someone has asked about the guns on campus, which number that was. So I was trying to pull that back up from Naomi's notes earlier today. The guns on campus one?
Oh, I forgot the name. There's so many bills. I don't have that one straight in my head yet. Wait, what was the question?
What was the bill number to stop guns on campus? So I was looking for.
Gay, can you go back maybe?
Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like Attica is in the chat, but we got to let her in. Okay, so yes.
Oh, sorry.
I'm
Three
trying
things at
to
once.
multitask.
I think it's a 200 number. Okay, House Bill 210.
Gotcha.
210.
All right, I'm gonna. I don't want to make y'all look at that while I do this. I'm gonna jump over here and see if I can find anyone in our green room that needs to join us. And I have still not figured out how to navigate this efficiently, so I apologize. There's Attica. We're gonna add her. We're gonna promote her to a panelist and allow her to talk. So she'll stay up over here soon, and I'm gonna unmute her.
This is exciting.
Tamara's in the room too. I just unmuted you, Tamara. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but just in case you want to say something, I unmuted you. Attica, welcome.
Hello. Thank you all so much for doing this. This is so exciting.
I'm so sorry we locked you out.
That's okay. I'm used to that. No. I watched the recording last week. I was so impressed. What an amazing group of talented women we have leading the Bill Watch Bill Club. And I just want to say to everyone who's tuning in, thank you so much for stepping up and saying that you want to be part of the movement in Kentucky to make it clear that you are analyzing, understanding, and taking action on legislation during this session and future sessions. And to all of you who have stepped up to run for office, thank you so much. I mean, it's going to be an amazing, beautiful image in January of 2019 when we have all of these women in the House and Senate who are going to be sworn into office.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you missed the part where we went over your bills. We did talk about the new bills that you have already introduced. So if you want, we can jump back to that slide and you can touch on them a little bit if you want. And
that's okay. I'm one of those people who I actually don't appreciate people who are late to meetings and then you got to go back and get them. I'm not going to be that person, but I appreciate the offer. But going forward, if there's anything, I'll just maybe chat and say, hey, folks, I'd love to add something here.
Yes, please do. Please chime in. Lisa Wilner is also in the room, and Jim Wayne will be joining us around 6:30 is what time he said he was going to be getting on. So we should be seeing him in the green room any minute now. I am multitasking from the same computer that I'm sharing my screen, so I have to jump off the slides every once in a while and just check and see if anyone's out there waiting because I am not working from my home office today. I'm unfortunately, we had a death in our family, so I'm actually down in Texas this week. So
sorry to hear that, Gay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But again, that's kind of part of the reason why some of this may be a little bit rockier than usual. So again, just continue to bear with us as we get this program up and running and get all the kinks worked out. Just stay with us. So it happens to be the slide for me next. I wanted to say a few things on the education front. This week is School Choice Week, and that is basically propaganda from the charter school profiteers that have been trying to push legislation that introduces what they call school choice, which of course we know is a misnomer. The schools are the ones who get to choose, not the students. We already have school choice in many districts such as JCPS. We don't need charter schools, and we certainly don't need this propaganda that they actually are sending to our schools. I have already seen on Facebook this week some JCPS schools that have been sharing activities that they're doing for School Choice Week. There's these ugly yellow scarves that people are sending home with their families and wearing around school, and they've got week-long activities. If you see this happening at one of your schools, please politely let the principal know where this is actually coming from. They don't even have to take our word for it. This is already happening in 44 other states where public education is being harmed by school choice. And they can just call one of their educator friends in one of these other states, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Massachusetts, you name it. There are Arizona. There are so many examples across the country that that they could be learning from. But because it's new in Kentucky, we're finding that people are buying into the propaganda, including our own legislators, which is why we saw that awful bill get passed this last session. I think as more people wake up and start paying attention to what's going on across the country, we will see more rejection of this bill. And unfortunately, it was too late to stop it last year, but Attica's got a bill that maybe we can overturn it and put a stop to it. So just wanted to let you know that that's what's going on if you see that yellow school choice propaganda. There are some bills in committee for tomorrow for the House Education Committee. There's 5 of them. I think the next slide, I'll actually show you a screenshot of those, but none of them talk about funding, and they keep legislating more and more responsibilities on our schools without giving us resources to do it. And our schools are broken on purpose. They call us failing. They call the schools failing, but really that's partly by design, by these increased responsibilities without the resources to do it. And then they cut funding, and then you've heard all these awful things that are on the horizon for more cuts. So Lisa's going to talk a little bit about that, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Just be aware who's calling for more tax deductions. There is a campaign out right now. Our legislators are getting calls from private schools and Catholic schools in particular promoting for this scholarship tax credit. Again, I don't think that the people making the calls understand that in order for them to get these benefits, the public schools will see money leave. I don't think that they've been fully explained what's going on, and so they're getting an email that says, hey, call your legislator and tell them you support this scholarship tax credit because it'll benefit, more students will have access to private schools. Well, that's actually not the case, because we've seen in other states that that's not who gets these scholarships. In fact, a lot of the private schools will there's supply and demand, right? So they'll just raise their tuition and siphon off money away from our public schools without opening up additional access to the students that would need it, or the tuition threshold is still so high that maybe they got a $5,000 credit that would help them get into private school, but the tuition is still $20,000. So these kids are not the ones that actually end up getting into the private school. So if you are a parent at a private school, or you have friends at private schools, again, gently take them aside and let them know what's really going on behind this messaging, and that it will harm our most vulnerable students.
And we also want to point out that this is going to affect every county in the state. It is not a Lexington or Louisville issue.
That is exactly right. Thank you, Stephanie. I put on here, this next tab is just read the labels. It's something that's been bugging me lately. And you know how we read the labels before we eat foods, and we make sure we don't have all these preservatives and high fructose corn syrup and all that good stuff? We need to be reading the labels on our bills. Basically, follow the money, consider the source. All the trails for this bad legislation lead back to ALEC and the Kochs. So if you learn to recognize the language or the patterns in other states, and when this step happens, then the next thing happens. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. We're talking about the teacher shortage. With the pension crisis, we're going to see teachers leaving the profession. Arizona's got 300 teachers that just retired because of the changes that they're making. Actually, they're on to the next phase of the playbook, and that is that they've reduced, because they have a shortage, now they're having to reduce the criteria for the qualifications for teachers. So recognize where we are in this whole process. We're at the pension crisis level now. We've got legislation that's being hinted at that could set us up for no longer requiring certification for teachers, no longer requiring the degrees and the various training and PD and continuing education that our teachers get. So we are dumbing down the education system as we see these ALEC bills come through the process. And then my last little bullet that I just wanted to mention, oops, and I clicked it when I meant to just highlight it. What's so special about January 30th? Attica and Lisa probably can tell us a little bit more. But basically, when we met with legislators last week, they kept talking about this 10-day, it was 10 days away. We've only got 10 more days. They are hyper focused on this January 30th filing deadline, because if they don't have challengers, then they're holding off on introducing really bad legislation right now, because they know if they do, or they pass really bad bills, more of us are going to rise up. And so they're being very delicate about what's introduced, what comes out of committee, what goes on the floor until the January 30th deadline passes, because they know the power that we have. So we have to file. We have to make sure that when that January 30th deadline comes and goes, they have challengers, because that's, as Joni called it, an insurance policy. Joni Jenkins was on last week, and she said, it's a $200 insurance policy to keep your legislator responsive and voting in a way that is friendly to the constituents they serve, not the ALEC agenda. So I'm going to switch to this next slide.
And I want to add to that, Gay,
Please.
and just say, if you're considering running, you have 1 week from tomorrow to file, run. The worst that could happen is that you would lose. And I'm here to tell you that you can lose and then you can win. I ran for school board in 2010. I lost, and then ended up being appointed to Louisville Metro Council in 2011, lost that race in 2014, and then came back in 2016 and ran for State House and won. So a loss sometimes can be a setup for something else that you are supposed to be doing, should be doing, and could be doing, but you weren't yet ready to go there until you were forced to. So run, and if you lose, know that there may be something else that you're supposed to be doing that's even bigger and has an even broader impact.
And
Yes.
Attica, thank you for being such a great example of persisting.
Thank you, Lisa. Also, January 30th is my birthday. Now I'm going to go on mute.
Maybe that's what they're talking about. They're like, we got to get this done before Attica's birthday. That's what it is.
Gay, I've got a text coming in from Jim Wayne. He says he's on Zoom now, so
Yep.
maybe it's in the game.
I just added him. So Jim, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. Yay. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just honored to be with you, and I really do appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am wrapping up the education bills to watch, and then Lisa is on deck next, and then you guys are probably going to do a little bit of tag team, I think, because she wants to reiterate some things after you speak as well. So this is a little screenshot of the education bills to watch and tomorrow's agenda for the House Committee, Education Committee. And you can see there's 5 bills that have been put on the agenda, and every single one of them, if I remember correctly, talk about something they want our schools to do. And they keep dictating more and more responsibilities to our schools, but they don't tell us what's going to give or give us extra funding and resources to do it. So this is just one of those things I was saying about who's going to pay. We need to put pressure on our legislators to stop coming up with things that cost money and instead provide us with support and resources and fund our schools, adequately fund our schools. Mm-hmm. So you guys know about the scholarship tax credit, HB 134. We talked about that last week. That is still moving, and that's the one that's got all those calls from the Catholics and the private schools. And again, we don't have anything against Catholic schools or private schools, but they need to be paid for out of private school funding. It should not come from our public school tax dollars.
Yeah, can I offer a comment on that? Being a Catholic, and our parish has a parish school, I will tell you that Catholic social teaching, the initial filter for all of Catholic social teaching is, how will this policy affect the most vulnerable people,
yes,
the poor of our community or our state? And so I'm thinking that the people within the Catholic Church who are pushing this legislation need to go back to the Catholic social teaching and recognize that this is going to harm people who are vulnerable. This is going to harm poor school districts. It will harm children poor children in schools. And at a time when we have a fiscal crisis in this state, at a time when social services are so strapped that they have 3 times as many cases on their social workers' caseload for vulnerable children and vulnerable adults who are in danger, it would be immoral to pass this legislation now. It would create a larger crater in our budget than we already have. So the comeback to any Catholic is, this is not the right thing to do right now in Kentucky. it is immoral based on Catholic social teaching.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. SB 55 is another bill that will harm our schools. It diminishes the responsibilities of SBDM, so it takes that local control away. And when it comes to choosing curriculum and picking principals, this is some of the CARA legislation that is a result of CARA education reform from 27 years ago. And we don't want to go backwards and have these opportunities taken away from our local schools. So that's another bill to keep an eye out for. We talked about HB 180, repealing the charter school legislation. That is Attica's bill. Attica, can you chime in and tell us what's the difference between 180 and 205?
I don't know that there's a difference between 180 and 205. I need to check in with Representative Nelson and see if maybe he wasn't aware about 180 when he filed 205. That's highly possible. Indeed
it is. Awesome. Okay. And then there is HB 187, which is the Ready to Read Act, which is a dyslexia bill, which we are in favor of. It was introduced by a Republican, so it has some good traction, but she's already getting pushback, which is ironic. She's feeling the heat of the fact that there's no funding for these bills. So that's a good thing, because they need to understand that they've put a lot of burdens on our schools, but we still want this bill to pass. We just need them to find the funding. And if we could invest in the front end of so many of these needs, it would save us money in the long run. And that's the message that we need to help our legislators understand too. Like, we can't keep cutting these valuable programs because they're just going to cost us more in the long run. And then Lisa is up next, but before we do that, Stephanie, do you want to chime in and let us know if we have any other comments or questions from what we've covered so far?
No, not yet. Everybody seems to be doing okay. They said there's 31 educators running so far.
Yay.
Yeah, that's doing good. Let's see. That's about it. Someone was asking that they needed to place a screenshot in, but I'm not sure how to do that. But other than that, everybody seems to be running along here.
Okay. Well, Lisa, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll just do a little quick introduction. Lisa is a school board member in Jefferson County, and she is also running for House District 35, which happens to be Jim Wayne's district. So we've got both of them on the call today, which is awesome. I invited Lisa to join us because the statements that Governor Bevin made Tuesday night had a lot of misinformation, and a lot of it was directed towards Jefferson County and Fayette County. And I knew she would know that she would know how much of that information was accurate, and I wanted her to be able to kind of set us straight. So that's kind of the second half of these slides that I have on here. Also, she is a psychologist, and her organization has been looking at SB 71 and some of the psychological effects. And you may need to explain that a little bit better than me, but we wanted to have her talk a little bit about SB 71, which is the abstinence bill that was just came out of Senate committee last week.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me here. This is a great forum. So Attica and this tremendous panel of women, this is just a great forum for the whole state. So thank you for putting this together. So I did want to mention HB 134, but you guys did it for me. That is such a pernicious bill, and Jim is absolutely right. I want to clarify that I'm not running against Jim.
Sorry.
I just want to make that clear. Jim is stepping down. He's been my state rep for 27 years, I guess, and just want to thank him for his service to the district and to the state. And Jim has often called the conscience of the legislature, and I think we heard it in those comments that he made about HB 134. Then if we are robbing the public coffers and putting, public money is for public schools, private money is for private schools, and it's just so troubling. And I think you're absolutely right too, Gay, that by and large people aren't thinking about the impact. They're thinking, this would be pretty good for me because I get a tuition break, but they're not understanding the impact that would have on our most vulnerable kids all over the state. All 173 school districts in the state, public school districts, would be affected by that. Thank you both for calling that out. So two things that I really want to talk about, and one of them has to do, and Gay, you mentioned this as well, just the number of unfunded mandates being put forth. There are a number, suicide prevention, financial literacy, sex ed, all incredibly important topics. But sometimes when these topics are addressed in the legislature instead of by educational experts, the intentions may be great, but the consequences can actually be pretty dire. So not only are they unfunded, but sometimes they're just, again, with the best of intentions, just can be poorly informed. So Senate Bill 71 in particular, this is a sex ed bill. And so as a psychologist, you know, I'm obviously very concerned about sex education as a public health issue, and that school age population, we want to increase sexual health. We want to increase healthy relationships. We want to decrease unintended pregnancies. And so, of course, as a psychologist, we agree that we support long-term, committed, loving, stable relationships, and that's going to benefit everyone in Kentucky. So we're concerned about this particular bill because we believe that sex education, to be effective, it needs to be medically accurate, scientific, developmentally appropriate, and so forth. And so the kind of abstinence-only approaches, what we've seen is that unintended pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, other public health challenges tend to increase when students don't have accurate, developmentally appropriate information. And in fact, I think most of us would agree that delaying sexual intercourse, delaying sexual contact, there are health benefits to that, and students are most likely to do that, to delay, when they do have accurate, good, medically responsible information. So we're concerned as psychologists about the potential impact of mandating from the legislature what should and should not be taught in sex education classes. So that's a huge concern. And that's really just one example of good intentions with potentially really terrible consequences for students, and to have the absolute opposite effect of actually threatening public safety, public health, rather than improving it. So the other piece that I do want to talk about, and actually I would wonder if we might skip over to Jim at this point, because I do want to talk about the budget. Our state budget is a moral document. All budgets from organizations are are moral documents, and so incredibly important that our budget reflects what we value. And what I value, what I believe all of you on this panel value, is a healthy state, an educated state, a prosperous state. We can't do that with a budget that has our hands tied behind our backs. So without further ado, actually one other thing that I do want to mention, in the Kentucky Constitution, there is only one mandated funding, and that's the funding of a system of public schools. And so this budget proposal is so threatening to a system of high quality public schools. So I think Jim can really present the big picture of that, talk about HB 200 and his bill to restructure with progressive tax restructuring to make a more have a reasonable approach to how we move our state forward.
Absolutely. And Sarah just asked if there's any type of sex education that is required in Kentucky. Is that up to the individual SBDM?
There is, it's part of health, it's part of the health curriculum, and as a curriculum matter, it's very much a school by school SBDM decision. However, the Kentucky Department of Education sets standards, and individual school boards can set policies, but the curriculum decisions do reside in the individual schools.
And it's also a very taboo subject. So sometimes, because there's fear about what they can and can't teach, they just don't teach it at all. So we're seeing, I know I've run into a lot of situations where it's not taught at all.
Well, and you know, we hear from health educators who have at their fingertips really good information that it's not necessarily clear to them what they can and cannot teach. And so a student who has been a victim of sexual assault, has been through sexual trauma, and maybe wanting to reach out to someone for help, in hearing in a sex education class that abstinence only is the one good true way, those folks are going to be much less likely to reach out for help. And then when they do reach out for help and for accurate information, the teachers themselves may feel hamstrung, that they're not able to provide that support, resources for students to get the help they may need.
Absolutely. I happen to notice that these are copied from Naomi's Bill Watch, and she has added that there's a floor amendment filed by Senator Forgy Kerr and then another one by Denise Harper Angel. Do you know what those are intended to do? Does anyone on this call happen to know what those are about?
Tamari, do you have insight into that?
She had to leave.
Okay.
All right. We'll try to get the answer to that question and share it out on our comments after the video is over. How about that? And so, Jim, we're going to switch to you and then come back to Lisa for her final comments about the governor's budget address. Let me just make sure my slide is moving forward here. There's a list of the programs that are no longer going to be funded. We'll jump back to that as well. Representative Jim Wayne has been a member of the Kentucky House of Representatives since 1991, and he is serving as the state's 35th House District, in Jefferson County. And he serves on the Appropriations and Revenue. I can't read behind there. I don't know if there's another word. State government, probably 4 state government, local government, and I can't see behind that slide either. Oh, look, it's only that way on my screen. I can look over here. It says local government and capital projects and bond oversight committees, as well as the governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Tax Reform 2012 and the Kentucky Housing Policy Advisory Board. He is a champion of tax reform, affordable housing, campus safety, enhancing penalties for sexual abuse of minors, and protection of workers and the vulnerable. He introduced House Bill 29. It's an act relating to taxation, and he's going to tell us about that bill. And then I have a link to a story that was in the Courier, an opinion piece that he wrote that was in the Courier Journal back in the fall that will also be shared in our comments section after the video. So Jim, welcome and thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm honored to be with you, like I said before. Would you like for me to just summarize some of the history and of how we got to this mess, and then options for us cleaning up the mess? Would
that sounds perfect.
Okay. The situation we're in right now was predicted over 20 years ago during the Patton administration, which occurred in the mid to 1990s into early 2000. There were several proposals to reform the tax system in Kentucky. And some of these actually were rooted in some earlier proposals in the early 90s, because economists and sociologists and budget experts were all saying, we are on the wrong track. The system we have right now will not grow revenue for the state the way we need it. And so a group of us got together in 1998, and we formulated many of these recommendations into a bill, one of the first tax reform bills. And I will say Governor Patton tried to tackle this in the last year or so of his administration, but if anyone, I know we have some young ladies on this in here, you might not remember Governor Patton much, but he ran into some political problems due to his personal indiscretion, shall we say. So he lost much of his political clout toward the end of his administration, and his proposal for tax reform didn't go anywhere. We have been proposing this every year for the last 20 years in various forms, but essentially the same form. And what happened in 2012 is that Governor Beshear actually, in a very enlightened move, established a Blue Ribbon Commission on tax reform. And it was a bipartisan commission made up of representatives from various communities in the state, I should say communities of interest in the state. And so we had multimillionaire business people, we had people who are in the education profession, the mental health profession, the social justice areas, and so forth. And we all sat down. It was over a year period, or nearly a year period, and it was chaired by Lieutenant Governor Jerry Abramson, who did an excellent job. And we arrived at a consensus of how the system in Kentucky should be restructured so that we could, first of all, address the fact that it's an unjust system. And the three key things about our system: that it's unjust, it's outdated, and it's inadequate. So regarding the injustice of it, if the studies all show in Kentucky that if you're in the top 5% of income earners, which we believe Governor Bevin to be, since he put about $3.5 million to $4 million in his own race for governor, and he lives in a $1 million plus mansion in Anchorage. So he's probably in the top 5%, although he did not show us his tax returns as he promised he would. Well, that was, I guess, his first lie in office. But so we're talking about that group. They're paying about 6% of their income in state and local taxes every year. Now, if you go to the middle income range, which many Kentuckians are, they're paying about 11%, between 10.5% and 11% of their income in state and local taxes. Then if you go to the lower range, the bottom 20% to maybe the bottom 30%, they're paying about 9%. So you see that we have a system that is not just. And the wealthy people are now the ones who control the legislature. They basically bought the Republican House with millions and millions of dollars, much of it dark money from outside the state, and they're in place. So it's unlikely that they're going to adjust this so the wealthy would pay more to make the system more just. So the first thing we need to remember, it is an unjust system. It's one of the most unjust systems in the nation. The second thing to realize is it's outdated. Much of the tax structure we have now was set in place in the 30s through the 50s. Now, we had what we call progressive income tax brackets. So as you increased your income, you increased the percentage of money from your income that went to the state coffers. But essentially, those brackets have never changed. My dad worked in the 1950s, and I remember when he came home, he said he worked at Seagram's Distillery on 7th Street Road in Shively, which has since closed. But his union had negotiated that they would receive $100 a week salary. Well, in the mid-1950s, that was a middle-class way of life. And so according to the brackets of the state of Kentucky, he would have paid maybe between 3% and 4% in income tax. The top bracket being about 5%. Now, what happens now is those tiers are so low, the bars are so low that you immediately get to the top tier in Kentucky. And so we essentially have a flat income tax, not a progressive income tax. So that's one of the examples of how it's outdated. Then when the sales tax was inaugurated in the early 1960s, it was primarily just on goods. It was on purchased goods. And we all know in the last 50 years that we've moved much more to a service economy rather than a consumer goods economy. So we have a very narrow, what we call a narrow base of sales tax. Now, sales taxes are always a regressive tax, which means that the poor people and working class people are going to be damaged much more by a sales tax than the wealthy people. And why is that? Well, because if you're wealthy, you don't use every dollar to survive. But if you're living in St. Catherine Tower down in Old Louisville on an income of about $10,000 a year, every buck that's coming in, you're going to sell. You're going to spend, and that buck, except for groceries and utilities and prescription drugs, is going to be taxed on the purchases you make. And you're not going to use a lot of services. And that, again, reflects the change in the culture. So my mother, God rest her soul, we just lost her last week, but my mother would do home perms. She never went to a manicurist, except in her later years when we treated her. But And she basically had a home perm set, or had one of her neighbors or friends come in and do home perms. And my dad put a piece of plywood on the washing machine and put us up there, and he buzzed our hair off. We didn't go to the barber. Okay, so now the children go to stylists, and the women, indulge themselves with manicurists and so forth, which is wonderful. But those are not taxed. And as the economy has shifted more to services, the services are not taxed. So the other thing we have to recognize is the sales tax is actually shrinking over time because the base is so narrow compared to what percentage of the economy is actual goods compared to services. And then the last thing in terms of the three defects of our current system is that it's inadequate. And all you have to do is look at the last 10 years and the severe cuts that we've made, especially to education, but also to social services, and not funding the pension the way we should have during the 2000s. And by the way, a lot of times the governor will refer to, or people might refer and say, well, the Democrats have messed up the pension system. Well, that's not true. You have to remember the Republicans controlled the Senate from the year 2000 on. And so any budget that was passed was bipartisan. And many of those budgets were horrible, and I consistently voted against them once I woke up to the fact of how bad they were. But it's inadequate, and it's been structurally imbalanced for the last probably 10 years. And by structurally imbalanced, what we mean is we don't have enough money coming in on a regular basis from taxes to cover our expenses. And so what we do is go to different pots of money in the state government, and we make a vacuum cleaner to them. And Lisa is a psychologist, and we know that the Board of Psychology is paid for by the psychologists who license themselves. And there are no tax dollars there. But what the legislature and the governors have done through recent years is they go to a group like the Psychology Board, and they say, oh, they paid all these renewal fees for their license to sustain this, but look, they have $2 million left over, or whatever the amount is, at the end of the year, and they're just going to sit on that. So we'll suspend the law that says we can't take that money, and we'll take a vacuum cleaner and siphon that money off and put it into the general fund so that we can balance a budget. And this budget that's being proposed now is taking, I think, over $200 million from the employee health insurance fund. Which is not; those aren't tax dollars. That's money that goes into that by the employer, the state government, and by the employees, and for their health insurance. And so what that does, of course, is eventually that causes higher premiums for the employees. That causes higher deductibles and copays. So it's a tax that's shifted because we've siphoned off that money and put it into the general fund. That's called a structurally imbalanced budget. And so what you've seen, that even with the structurally imbalanced budget, we still can't sustain the government. So we had 9% cuts the last 2 years in everything, on top of the cuts that we've had the previous 8 years. And this year he's proposing 6% plus cuts on everything that he's not eliminating. And we've seen the list of the 70 programs that he's eliminating. And those 70 programs include $200 million in K through 12 education, and that includes the transportation and healthcare costs that local school boards are going to have to pick up on. UK is going to be hit by $25 million. We have minority scholarships that are going to be hit. The Commission on Women is going to be eliminated. The Kentucky Center for the Arts gets no money. The University Press of Kentucky, which is our literary arm, is eliminated. Bucks for Brains, which was a great program under Democratic leadership that was started so we could attract scholars into the state at our two research universities, UK and U of L, that's eliminated. So, well, there's the list. Thank you. The whole list is there. Oh. And the governor didn't mention anything. All his thing was, he kind of played on the sympathies of people in his speech, if you saw it last week, by bringing the wonderful family up with adopted children. That's wonderful. We do need to address that issue. But then he put that in front of us so we'd be distracted and not look at how disastrous his budget is in all the other areas. Now, what's happened here is that the day of reckoning is here. It really is. This is a crisis. Our state is in a fiscal crisis, not only because of the pension, but because we don't have a system to sustain ourselves. And so what you see is the governor last year said we're going to have tax reform, but tax reform never came in a special session last year. We were going to have pension reform. Pension reform never came in a special session last year. I hate to say it, but I do not believe words that come out of the governor's mouth. And I don't think he has the capacity to build the coalitions necessary to salvage this state. And that is very frightening, folks. It really is. And then you don't have the backbone and leadership. You have a civil war going on in the House between Republicans, and you don't have the leadership in either chamber right now to step forward and say, we got to fix this state. And what that means is we have to increase revenue. And that means some people are going to get taxed more. And if we lose the election, so what? Do we have to do this for the sake of our people? So that's moral leadership that's lacking right now. At least I haven't seen it. We'll see. Maybe with this session, we can actually discover there's some moral leaders. So what we've done is introduce the bill. Much of it's based on the blue ribbon panel. And what it will do is change the tax bracket so the wealthy are paying a percentage more. It restores the estate tax so the wealthy can actually pay for the money that's accumulated in their families. And then we've also broadened the sales tax to services. And the services that we're including are services that are primarily used by the wealthy. Because if you're going to broaden the sales tax, you don't want to hit the poor and middle class even more because that's a regressive tax. Now, Lisa knows from her house, she can hear Kentucky Kingdom in the summer. And you go to Kentucky Kingdom, the working class families and the poor kids that go to Kentucky Kingdom, they pay a 6% tax on that ticket going into Kentucky Kingdom. You walk across the street from where Lisa lives or down the street to Audubon Country Club, the people who are playing golf there, they do not pay a penny in sales tax for their greens fees. They don't pay a penny for their membership dues in that private country club. So those are the kind of things that we want to tax. The other thing is professional landscaping services. Not talking about the guy down the little freshman in high school who cuts your lawn in the summer. We're talking about professional landscape services would be taxed. We're talking about professional tailoring and cleaning services would be taxed. We're talking about limousines would be taxed. So these are what we've done is go through the whole laundry list of what services could be taxed that are primarily used by the wealthy. And those are the ones that we've included in the bill. The other thing we've done is close loopholes, a number of loopholes, especially for out-of-state investments by corporations and individuals and out-of-country investments by corporations and individuals. And that's really important to do because that's kind of a no-brainer. But again, remember who put this legislature in place and remember where their investments might be hidden. And then the other thing that we think is real important is that those people who are in the lower income, the bottom 40%, they should get a tax break. And so what we've done is to establish an earned income tax credit in Kentucky. There are about 38 states that have earned income tax credits. And those of you who don't know what that is, we have a federal program designed by Republicans years and years ago that is intended to lift people out of poverty. So it encourages people to work. When they work, they get actually a boost back on their income from the federal government. It's called an earned income tax credit. Many states have this. Like I said, Kentucky does not. So what we would do is put an earned income tax credit in at 15% of what they're already getting from the federal government. So an extra boost for those families, working families that are living in poverty. And then also there's a $1 increase in the cigarette tax that's included. So that's a quick summary. I hope I didn't bore you because taxes can be really boring, but it's so vital that we fix this because so much of our civilization in Kentucky is based on this. I can't hear you, Gabe.
Sorry, you're right. I had it muted because my dogs were going crazy. Thank you for explaining all of that. I had heard a separate bill for a separate bill for the cigarette tax. So some of this could pass a la carte. Is that possible?
Yeah, it could. It could. That to me, that's not a wise way to do it, but yeah, it could do that.
All right. We're going to turn it back to Lisa because I think she wanted to talk some more about the programs that are being cut and also what Governor Bevin spoke about on Tuesday. And then we'll open it up to some of the comments and questions that have been asked in our group. So if you have questions, if you're watching along and you want to ask a question of any of our panelists, we do have Tamari with Planned Parenthood also on the call. So if you have a question for her, feel free to type them in the comments and we will get to them at the end. So I'm going to switch it back to Lisa now, and I'm going to go back, hopefully, I think, to her screen as well.
I keep catching a glimpse of my face looking horrified, and it's because I'm looking at this list of things that are being cut, and it's just astonishing how much of it is education, which is the backbone of how we grow this state, and that's where we're chopping. It's just astonishing. So, oh gosh, where to even start? And I know we're short on time here, but let me just say that this is some of the cuts that, again, affect all 173 public school districts in the state. General fund money to overall SEEK is cut. General fund money to base SEEK is cut. General fund money going to total learning and results services is cut. Level of new state offers of assistance for facilities to the districts, all the school districts, is cut. General fund money to district employee health insurance, as Jim pointed out, is cut. And furthermore, the proposal to that cut states that if there's a shortfall, the districts, each individual district has to pick those cuts up, have to cover that themselves. General fund money for textbooks is eliminated. When I was out knocking on doors, campaigning for the school board, that was one of the things that I heard the most. Why don't my kids have books to bring home? Why don't we have enough books? What's wrong with Jefferson County Public Schools? This is a state issue. We've had state funding in the past for textbooks. Now that's being cut altogether. General fund money to state mandated transportation is severely cut, and I'll say a little bit more about that. I think there are a lot of people who have strong feelings about transportation in Jefferson County Public Schools. There's been a big push for neighborhood schools. There's a lot about that I think maybe people don't fully understand. One of the things, however, is that the state requires all school districts, all of us, if a student lives more than a mile away from school, to provide transportation. So the so-called, neighborhood schools bill, or the, resegregation bill, as some of us called it, it's not going to eliminate buses. And so these cuts to transportation are cuts that go instantly right back onto the backs of the overburdened school districts. It's a huge problem. So I think there's a lot about that that's just not very well understood. So as for Jefferson County Public Schools in particular, these budget proposals, our early analysis shows a $25 million cut to our overall budget, and that's on top of the $17 million in additional pension costs. The transportation cost cut, get this, represents the largest K through 12 education cut in Kentucky history. How astonishing is that? That's just the largest cut at a time when kids are coming to school with greater needs than ever before. We have more kids in poverty in our school district, not just in Jefferson County, but across the state. I get a little fired up.
Good.
So the cuts to the Kentucky Department of Education are going to also filter down to the local school districts, are going to cause additional burdens on our districts. The fund balance, and Jim, what you were saying about the rating of boards, it's like, those people over there are sitting on a pile of money, let's just go take it. So Jefferson County Public Schools, like every the district in the state, is required to maintain a fund balance. The state legislature requires 2%. That's dangerously low. National best practices and the Kentucky School Board Association recommends 5%. Jefferson County Public Schools fund balance is actually less than what would be considered best practices. And it's so frustrating because on the one hand, if we didn't have that fund balance that we're required to have, if we dipped even lower, we would be accused of poor stewardship of resources. But since we have taken good care of the resources, we have, what's the equivalent of the state rainy day fund that's in good shape in our school district. It's in much worse shape in some other school districts, and that's terrifying. To come in and accuse us of just sitting on big piles of cash that can be diverted elsewhere is
Irresponsible.
Irresponsible. Thank you. That it is so irresponsible. And the problem is, so as a member of the Kentucky School Board Association, and I talk with school board members from all over the state, and it's very easy to make Jefferson County Public Schools the bad guy because we're the biggest target. But the other school districts do not see us that way at all. We are all in the same boat, the boat that's going to rise or sink together. We all have the same fight ahead of us. And because Jefferson County Public Schools, we've got 100,000 students, whereas some districts have fewer, 500 students. And so everything is just blown up out of, bigger. And so it's so easy to make us appear to be the bad guys and irresponsible, and we're just sitting on people's cash. Now, can we manage our funds even better? Yes, there's always going to be ways that we can improve. Continuous improvement is important, and that's why it's so important that we have locally elected school boards who are responsive to their constituents. People can pick up the phone, can call me, text me, email me, as they do with the other 6 board members, elected board members, and we are responsive to them. We understand their issues. These are our constituents. And so this casting the school districts as these, big, bad, greedy monsters sitting on resources that could better be used to support more important, and I don't know what's more important than education anyway, initiatives is just misleading, distressing, and it's not moving our state in the right direction.
Absolutely not. We're still okay on time. We're into the part that we dedicated for Q&A, but that's okay. I'm going to start by asking you a question, actually. One of the things that I see cut here is the Georgia Chaffee Teenage Parent Program. And that's also what we refer to in Jefferson County as the TAP program, which is, we actually have 2 campuses where teenage girls who get pregnant can attend school, finish high school, get the support they need, get child care, get health care, get reproductive care so that they don't find themselves with a second unwanted pregnancy. And I just find this to be incredibly hypocritical that the GOP would cut a program like this when this is a program that supports the anti-abortion movement. These girls are choosing to carry their babies to term instead of having an abortion. So I don't understand why this isn't applauded and paraded as a success story for that party instead of being cut, because it just scares the bejeebus out of me what's going to happen to these girls and this program when it's cut. And if there's a desire to cut back on the number of abortions, I don't see how I think this is a counterintuitive cut. And so I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I think you've mainly said my thoughts already, Gay. I mean, this is a program that helps families stay together. It gives young mothers the supports that they need to be able to take care of their infants, their toddlers, their preschoolers. It teaches them, not only the academic skills, but they've got support, they've got built-in childcare, they've got parenting classes. And so you're right. I mean, it's in a literal sense, a family values, a family affirming kind of a program. And to think that's, and it's a nonpartisan issue. We all love children. We all love mothers. We want to keep them together. We want healthy families. So for that to be on the chopping block is just mind-boggling.
It is. Well, and education in general should be a nonpartisan issue, but for some reason here we are. So, Stephanie, have you seen any other questions or comments that people would like to ask of our guests on the show today?
Yes, from earlier, I saw someone was asking if there was any way to review the past budgets. approved budgets from our past to review? Is that available online?
Yes. Yeah, all those budget bills are available online. The problem is you almost need a PhD in economics to decipher them if you're not part of the Frankfurt culture. So it's hard to figure out what's happening in those budgets. But there would be available, not my office would be glad to provide it, a summary of some of those that distills the key points of those budgets. And anyone needs that, they can contact my office in Frankfurt, and you can access me on the web. They get that number on the Legislative Research Commission website, and I'll be glad to get any information they want about previous budgets.
Jim and Attica, let me just ask you guys, I know there's the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. Are there other go-to kind of nonpartisan think tanks where people can go for good, unbiased economic information?
Well, the Center for Budget Priorities in Washington analyzes each state and their budget priorities and their tax structure. And so accessing that on the web, the Center for Budget Priorities is a wonderful think tank. And then the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth are also a great resource. If you can access the information they have some very detailed information there to be helpful. And they're not partisan.
Yeah, and I just chatted out to the panelists a link to the Office of the State Budget Director, which does have budget briefs and also breaks down the budget by topical areas, so that for people who are interested in digging into the budget itself, there are different ways on that website that the budget is broken up, so that it makes it a little bit easier to digest.
Good point, Attica.
Stephanie, do you have any other questions yourself that you would like to ask?
There's a couple of questions still out here. I'm just having issues expanding the question to read it, so I can't see the whole thing. But I do have a question about the taxes and what you all were saying earlier about the Kentucky Constitution. You said that all that money as it is right now is supposed to go to public schools, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so with all these tax cuts and everything, it's going to be a lot harder to be success. So on paper, it's going to look like you're failing and failing and failing. What happens if you continuously fail? What gives them the right to change things? What's the plan if you fail?
I'm not clear.
The reason I ask this is because is this give them opportunity to take all the public funds and put into charter schools in the future? I mean, why can't the whole state go charter? Is that their plan? States' rights.
Well, it's hard to know what their whole plan is, but much of the policies of the Republican House and the Republican Center come from the American Legislative Exchange Council playbook, which is basically a corporate funded organization. It's a front organization for corporations to basically control the government for their benefit. And so, yes, they do put a priority on charter schools, and their interest, of course, is in for-profit corporations getting a hold of public funds to set up these charter schools that do not follow basic guidelines on education. So whether or not there's a long-term plan to eliminate all public schools, I don't know. But they certainly have a toehold now with the legislation passed last year.
There's a book that I would direct folks to called Vanishing School Boards. And I'm blanking on the author's name. I'm sorry about that, but Vanishing School Boards. And it talks about really decades of trends toward taking authority away from locally elected school boards. And one of the deeply hidden, it's actually on page 125 of this budget proposal, is that notwithstanding other laws that this budget would require school boards to make certain administrative cuts, certain cuts. Well, that notwithstanding, that particular law has to do with locally elected school boards' authority to manage their own funds and to levy their own taxes. So if a school district is strapped because of money being pushed further, deeper onto the district, which is what's been happening in Kentucky over a number of years, but then our ability to levy taxes is also hampered, and our ability to locally make decisions about how tax money is spent is now being wiped away further. So this really is part of a much larger national agenda to chip away at the authority of locally elected school board members. It's quite frightening, actually.
And that actually kind of sets up another question that I would like to ask. We've seen some overt and covert efforts to undermine our school boards, and I can't help but think that, like Jim was inferring earlier too, that since we can't see some of these people's tax returns, we don't know that they aren't in a position to profit from the charter schools or the scholarship tax credits and the various things that are being proposed. And undermining our school board's ability to make these decisions ties in hand in glove with this plot. I mean, I sound like a conspiracy theorist whenever I tell people this story, but we see it playing out in other states, so we'd be naive to not acknowledge that this is likely to happen in Kentucky, which is known for being one of the most corrupt states in the country. So we see Hal Heiner's name on the founding documents of the Ed Choice organization. We've seen now the fundraising arm for JCPS has changed its name, and it looks like they're going to be fundraising for charters and possibly private schools too. And the scholarship tax credit, correct me if I'm wrong, but the scholarship tax credit gives an advantage to private schools because it's a dollar for dollar tax write-off, whereas when you would donate in the past to a charity, whether it's a public school or Planned Parenthood or what have you, it comes off your taxable income. So it's a reduction in the amount you're taxed, but it's not a dollar per dollar write-off. So if we now have an individual who's going out drumming up donations, and private schools now have a greater tax incentive than our public schools, all that money that we've seen that people generously donate to us could be at risk as well. Am I off base in any of this?
I haven't heard anything you said that's off base.
Same.
Well, I appreciate that, although I really hate feeling like a conspiracy theorist or a lunatic sometimes.
I totally get everything you're saying. It's because we see a lot of other stuff in the chatter going on the outside. I see what you're saying. Absolutely.
It's frightening.
That maxim that you're not paranoid if they're really out to get you.
Something like that.
Like a good psychologist.
Well, what I continue, like we talked about Bevan's taxes, he said he would release them and he didn't. And he won, and then so Trump did the same thing. It's like, Kentucky's like a pilot state. If they can get away with it in Kentucky, then they do it in the federal,
Well, we haven't even talked about the Medicaid waiver, right? And how that's stripping 500,000 Kentuckians of their health insurance coverage. It's after we've made so much progress, the only southern state to expand Medicaid coverage, made so much progress as a state. And it's just
heartbreaking.
Well, and Gay has not talked about, and this ties into what Stephanie was saying, the teacher pension proposals by this administration. I talked with my friend who lives in Evansville. She teaches at Southern Indiana University in the education department. And she said that teachers are coming over to Southern Indiana University and seeking employment in Indiana because things are so unstable here in Kentucky financially with the local school districts, but also with the pension package. Yeah. And to think that he wants to replace teacher retirement system, which has been in place for over 80 years and is very effective, with a 401k type of system, which all financial experts would tell you will not produce a stable income the way the teacher retirement does. And to keep in mind that teachers do not get Social Security. That's their Social Security program. So we were pleased to see the pushback from teachers and other public employees last fall when the Bevan administration released its proposal. But they're behind closed doors right now rewriting that. And we have to recognize that the impact, the hit to public schools with anything that's going to hurt that teacher retirement system is going to be severe. So we have to be really on guard about that.
And Jim, that just hits really close to home for me. My daughter, who just JCPS graduated from college and is now working on her master's in teaching, wants to be a Jefferson County Public Schools middle school math teacher. I could not be prouder that that's what my daughter wants to do. And I have had so many people say, tell your daughter she needs to, and these are teachers, Jefferson County Public School teachers, tell her to have her career in Southern Indiana, at least maybe it's safe a little longer there. And that's frightening. We need to be attracting bright, committed, socially justice-minded young people to be teaching in our schools, not sending them across the river.
Right. And I think it's important to know a little history, and that is when Bert Combs filed suit against Bert Combs, the governor from early 1960s, filed suit as an attorney in the late 1980s. He won the case for equalizing funding in Kentucky schools. And that set the stage for the Kentucky Education Reform Act, which was passed in the spring of 1990. I joined the following year. I joined the legislature, and I was there in shaping and executing that law. And it was amazing. We were a model for the nation as we launched our reformed education system. And it was based on equalizing funding through Frankfurt for all the districts in the state and making sure that we had all the wraparound services and support services and the local decision-making mechanisms in place. It was a remarkable, comprehensive bill. And now it's been threatened by what we see now with these extreme right-wing, pro-corporation, pro-wealthy folks that are now in charge of the legislature.
And, and the Family Resource and Youth Service Center, that piece of CARA that's been, one of the pieces that's been more or less intact. State funding has gone away over the years. Jefferson County Public Schools has picked up the balance because we know how important those wraparound services are for the success of our students. And we don't even, or I at least don't fully yet know what the impact is going to be on our Friskies, but it's not looking good.
No, and the Friskies have really never been fully funded by the state. There are schools that are crying out for these support services, and they've never gotten them in the 27 years.
And there seems to be a plan, whether it's intentional or not, to push more and more burden down to the district level.
Yes.
And we just can't afford that. We can't support that. So districts can go bankrupt. We will see some districts going bankrupt as a result of these not finding funding. We need to find funding first. It's insane to me that we've put the cart before the horse and won't even consider ways to raise revenue.
I agree. And if you go on my Facebook page, I do have a link there to the op-ed I wrote this week about putting tax reform ahead of the budget. That you can't pass a budget like this. This is immoral. And you have to do the tax reform, a good comprehensive tax reform that's fair to generate the revenue that we need to run this state, invest in our people.
Absolutely. I just switched to the next screen, which is action steps, and I'm going to run through these real quick so people get a better understanding of what we've listed here. I did want to, Brandy asked a question that segues nicely into this question, or into this section. She says, KRS states that if you are a merit employee for the state, you pretty much can't do anything politically except vote. Can we do something about this so we can all get active? First of all, is that an accurate statement, or I've found that we tend to interpret laws way too conservatively or policies way too conservatively, and then we find ourselves not doing enough. And like this Catholic school example, they're out there in force, and we're sitting around worried about whether or not we can do something, and so we do nothing. And so what can we do to clarify what state employees are allowed to do so that we do it to the max?
Well, Attica may want to comment on this, but I'm not going to give them legal advice. I'm not a licensed attorney or a bar-approved attorney, but I think it's important for them to get legal advice on what they can and can't do, because they do have certain rights, and then they have certain limitations also.
Well, and we definitely need to do more than vote. We can call our legislators. I think everything on this action step slide is definitely within the scope of what a state employee is allowed to do. You are public citizens too. You have legislators who are responsible for you. So getting in touch with them through whatever method, if you're a state employee, you need to exercise every single one of these. You can call the legislative message line at 800-372-7181. The people on the phone there are extremely nice and in fact are generally on our side. They'll tell us thank you and that, ooh, they like the way we phrase that because, you know, they're hearing different life experiences and different perspectives that help our legislators make good decisions. So it's important that we share personal testimony with them. Email them. We have a special page on the saveourschoolsky.org website where you can contact your legislators with 3 easy clicks. You click once to get all the House reps in a reply all. It just opens up your email client and all their email addresses are in the to box. And then that's the Senate because there's only 38 of them. We've got the House broken up in the first 50 and the second 50 so that it doesn't become, so it doesn't break your email system. So 3 easy clicks to contact every single legislator in the House and Senate. Send them handwritten notes, letters, even if it's through snail mail. That speaks to them. They get something in the mail, they hear your story, they realize if they get 20 or 30 on a particular issue that this is a sensitive issue, that they need to be careful about how they vote. Schedule a meeting in Frankfurt. Come on up there. We are there. We'll even come with you because we're there every Tuesday through Thursday from 11 to 2. Save Our Schools has representatives hanging out in the annex basement hallway on the way to the tunnel. We see legislators coming through between meetings on their way to chambers. They'll stop and talk to us. We're building relationships. We will introduce you to these legislators. They're very friendly. Even the ones that don't always agree with us do, for the most part, unless I think Jim hinted that there might be a few that have an agenda that have been placed there and they don't really care what we have to say. But for the most part, the majority of legislators in Frankfurt do want to hear from us and are very approachable. Send opinion letters to the local paper. We've got to keep our counter message out there because there are astroturf groups out there like BIPS and Pegasus Institute, and we see more and more of them, even from out of state, sending their opinion letters to the local papers, explaining why SBDMs need to go away. And the reason they want SBDMs to go away, for example, is really because they wanted to get their online computer classes introduced, but the SBDM said no because they knew it was a ripoff. So now they want to remove the SBDM so they can remove that barrier and get their profit agenda pushed through to the districts and to the schools. Yeah. Another thing you can do is join Attica for her legislative updates on Fridays at 6 p.m. on Facebook. And again, we created our timing on Mondays at 6 so that we book in nicely with Attica. So really your whole week staying informed starts with the Monday Women on Watch and ends with the 6 p.m. on Friday with Attica. And then, as I mentioned, join us here Mondays at 6. Follow us and retweet us. We also have a WOW Kentucky Twitter account. So please follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. We've got the private group. You have to be a woman to be added to the private group, but we also have a public page. We'll be sharing this video, for example, out on our public page once we get it uploaded to YouTube. And again, run for office. I think what we need to do next week is list any seats that have not gotten a candidate filed. And in the next it'll be the 28th, I believe. Is that right? A week from today?
I would make that list maybe on a daily basis. The Secretary of State's office does it, refreshes it several times a day. So because there are going to be some seats that are open, and I liked what Attica said earlier. Go ahead and run. If you lose, so what? You're still going to make some noise, and you're going to shake some people up.
Exactly. And again, it keeps that counter message out there that we were saying is so important. And we have been sharing daily lists, or at least somewhat every 3 or 4 days. So I'll get that updated and put it on our Facebook page. But on Monday, when we come back and meet here again, we'll make sure we touch on those names as a last ditch effort to make sure there's someone in every seat, and not just Democrats running against bad anti-public education, for example, is the names that we're identifying. But don't just focus on getting Democrats in the race. let's find some moderate, reasonable Republicans to challenge these ALEC Republicans that have been just pushing awful, awful legislation. There have got to be some reasonable Republicans out there who are like, that is not my party. I want to see a challenge in the Republican side as well. And that's been a threat that ALEC has always held over some of these legislators. If you don't pass our legislation, we're going to put somebody in to primary you. Well, you know what? Let's put the constituents in there to primary them. Let us have that threat over them so they do what we want them to do, not what ALEC wants them to do. And I think that is my last slide. If there are any other questions, Stephanie, let us know if there's anything else we want to talk about while we have these wonderful guests on. No? Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And
You're
thank you
welcome.
for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And I do hope we can have you on again. And in the meantime, feel free to send us updates and let us know what's going on that's of concern to you so that we can share it with our audience.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say
Thank
one
you.
more thing before I hang up. There is another book. Lisa mentioned a book that we should all read. There's another book called Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean that is kind of a follow-up to the Dark Money books that have been circulating. They're a little bit further out of date, but all of those books tell more about the Koch agenda and ALEC and what's really behind that big movement. We could spend a week nonstop talking about everything that's going on in that particular realm. But Democracy in Chains is the book that's the newest one. And I'm actually doing a book club for the League of Women Voters in February. I think it's February 21st. It's a brown bag discussion. And so if you get the book and you want to come to the brown bag in February, we'll be talking about Democracy in Chains. So, and Lisa, I cut you off. I don't know if you had any.
I know that this has mainly been for legislators. There's only been 2 episodes, but I really do appreciate your including a locally elected school board member. It's really important. So thank you for letting me share that perspective.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you for doing so. All right. Well, join us again next week when we come back here for Women on Watch at 6 p.m. on Monday in Facebook Live. Thank you all. Enjoy your evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.